Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. We've seen some notable instances over the years of players refusing to play for the team that drafted them. Players adamantly state that they're not going to play for that team. And when you hear those stories, you often hear of the players getting his wish. In 1983, John Elway told the Colts not to draft him. They did, and he never played a snap for them. In 1986, Bo Jackson told the Buccaneers not to draft him. They did, and he never played a snap for them. And in 2004, Eli Manning told the Chargers not to draft him. They did, and he never played a snap for them. That raises the question, are there any instances of a team winning? Are there any examples where a player told the team to not draft him, the team did it anyway, the team called his bluff, and the team won? Well, that's exactly what happened in 1982, the story that you may not know about. In 1982, the Minnesota Vikings spent their first round pick on a player who said not to take him. And the player wound up playing a decade in Minnesota. And this is the story behind that. Before I talk about the controversy, we need some context leading up to the draft. Entering the 1982 NFL Draft, there was one halfback who was getting a ton of love, and that was Stanford running back Darrin Nelson. He was one of the best halfbacks in the entire country, finishing 6th in the Heisman voting as a senior in 1981. He ran for over 1,000 yards 3 times in 4 seasons. He averaged over 5 yards per carry in every single season, which is incredible when you consider the fact that he had at least 160 rushing attempts in all of them. He had 16 touchdowns as a senior in 11 games. And not only was Nelson a fantastic player running with the ball, but he was fantastic catching it as well. This will become ironic towards the end of the video. However, in 1981, Nelson led the Pac-10 in receptions and receiving yards, all while finishing 2nd in rushing yards. To this day, he ranks 3rd in conference history and 10th in NCAA history in yards from scrimmage. He was the first player in NCAA history to rush for 1,000 yards and catch 60 passes in the same season. Nelson was the complete package. Not only was he expected to get drafted, but he was expected to get drafted really high, as there was a really good chance he was going to be the first running back off the board. That takes us to the Minnesota Vikings, who desperately needed a running back. The team was 7-9 in 1981, which was tied for the team's worst record in franchise history since 1967. And perhaps the biggest reason why they were below 500 was because they couldn't run the ball to save their lives. The Vikings ranked dead last in rushing yards and dead last in rushing touchdowns. Ted Brown was a solid fullback as he had over 1,000 yards rushing that year, but the depth behind him was laughably bad. Ricky Young had the 2nd most carries, and he finished the season with 129 yards on 2.7 yards per carry and 0 touchdowns. They put the ball on the ground 39 times. And this inability to run the ball came back to bite him in a big way at the end of the season. The Vikings started off 7-4, but dropped their final 5 games as the days got colder when they couldn't pound the rock. They had just 28 yards rushing in a loss to the Packers, and followed that up with just 38 yards rushing in a loss to the Bears. Over the final 5 games of the season during their losing streak, they scored 1 rushing touchdown. That's it. The Vikings needed a running back. They were looking at Darrin Nelson. What was Nelson's reaction? He said no. We have to ask ourselves this question before going any further. Why did Nelson not want to play with the Vikings? Well, this had nothing to do with any organizational chaos or turmoil, and didn't have to do with the front office screwing him out of his college eligibility. What it boiled down to was that he thought he would hate it in Minnesota. Nelson was born in California. He went to high school in California, and went to college in California. He was a Cali dude, with sunshine, surfing, and tons of nightlife. He did not want to go to Minnesota, so much so that he sent a letter out to the Vikings before the draft saying, "Please do not draft me." This was the only team he sent a letter to. As to why he didn't send a letter to any of the other NFC Central teams, his agent said, in retrospect, "I should have written the others so it wouldn't look that bad." But there was never a chance that Detroit or Chicago would draft him, as they had Billy Sims and Walter Payton respectively. Another important piece of information in Nelson being adamant about not wanting to play in the Twin Cities is that in 1979, the Vikings spent their 4th round draft pick on Stanford quarterback Steve Dills. Dills and Nelson were teammates during the 1978 season, and so they kept in close contact with each other. Dills told Nelson that Minnesota was boring, and that there wasn't a whole lot to do up there. That, combined with Minnesota's low payroll compared to other teams in the league, and the fact that it would have been really tough for his family to see games in Minnesota, was all that Nelson needed to hear. After the Vikings drafted Nelson, he expressed his disappointment. He said, "I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I'm used to big cities. I like to do things in the city. I like to go to discos." When Nelson was informed by a media member that Minnesota had discos, Nelson responded with this incredible line, saying, "I don't want to go to discos and listen to country music." I'm sure most people would feel the same way. I wasn't around back then, but I'm pretty sure the dance floor wasn't grooving if the DJ put some Kenny Rogers on. So here's where we are right now. Nelson doesn't want to move to Minnesota. He told the Vikings to not draft him, but they did it anyways. Who's going to win this battle? Well, based on the clips you saw over the past few minutes in the intro, the Vikings ended up winning it. Sort of. Nelson wound up signing and playing with the Vikings. Before he went to Minnesota, a few Vikings fans shipped him some mail to his California house. Most told him that life in Minnesota wasn't bad, and told him about the fun things you could do there. One fan even went as far as shipping him a Minnesota survival kit, featuring earmuffs and mosquito repellent, which Nelson thought was pretty funny. Bud Grant assured him that Minnesota was a fine place to be, and wide receiver Ahmad Rashad sent him a telegram telling him not to judge Minnesota before he got there. But at the end of the day, money talks, and the Vikings offered a lot of it once they realized he might not be bluffing and thought there was a possibility that he could enter the CFL. Yes, there's a fantastic irony in him playing in the CFL, as you would think that would make his problem worse. But regardless, he showed up to minicamp and then signed a contract in late July for somewhere in the ballpark of $800,000 over 3 years. Considering he got a guaranteed 3-year deal, while most players on the team got a series of 1-year contracts, that cleared up his tentativeness pretty quickly. And as it turns out, Nelson loved Minnesota. That summer, Nelson got an internship at a mutual fund brokerage firm. And as he got acclimated to the state, he actually enjoyed it. He enjoyed it so much, in fact, that even when he was done playing, he lived there for a long time. He even had 2 separate stints with the Vikings, as in 1991, he willingly returned. Turns out, Minnesota wasn't so bad after all. That raises the question, how did Nelson's playing career turn out? Well, it's complicated. On one hand, he lasted 11 seasons. For any player, especially a running back, to have a career that long is impressive. You carve a career out for yourself that's over a decade long, and you're doing something right. Plus, he led the league in yards per carry in 1987 and finished his career with over 7,000 yards from scrimmage. On the other hand, he never had 1,000 yards rushing in a single season, and he only crossed the 800-yard mark once. He never made a Pro Bowl, never even got close to an All-Pro nomination, and only had 1 season where he started at least 12 games. I remember what I said about his receiving abilities being a big reason why he got drafted so high, and how that would become incredibly ironic later on? Because if you know Darrin Nelson for one thing, it's probably this drop on 4th and goal at the end of the 1987 NFC Championship, which would have sent the game into overtime. Instead, Washington won 17-10 in an absolutely heartbreaking moment for Vikings fans everywhere. And to make matters worse, had Minnesota decided to take Nelson's advice and not draft him, then it's extremely likely that the Vikings would have chosen one of the next 2 running backs off the board. Those guys were Gerald Riggs, a 3-time Pro Bowler who had over 8,000 rushing yards in his career and is arguably the greatest halfback in Falcons history, and Marcus Allen, who is a Hall of Famer that needs no introduction. In other words, evaluating the Nelson selection is extremely complicated, because while I'd be hard-pressed to call him a bust, I'm not exactly calling the selection of a top 10 pick on him good either. So what's the moral of the story? For any team, when a player says they won't play for you, and you call their bluff, you'll sometimes win. And for any player, don't knock a city until you try it, or something like that. Because in the case of Darrin Nelson, you might wind up liking it and being pleasantly surprised. Be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JRGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.